You have never wondered how they met. That is worth sitting with for a second, because it is genuinely strange. You have watched this show, possibly all of it, possibly several times. You know the treehouse, you know the routine, you know exactly what a morning in that house sounds like. And the question of how a human boy and a magical dog ended up living together has probably never once crossed your mind, because from the first frame of the first episode, it was already true, and things that are already true when you arrive do not feel like they need explaining. That is how it works with the people who were there before you were paying attention. Your parents were already married. Your oldest friend was already your oldest friend. There was no beginning that you witnessed, so there is no beginning in your head, and the relationship simply is, like the weather. But there was a beginning. There was a specific day in a specific wood when a dog found a baby. And there is an ending, which the show also gives you, much later, quietly, when nobody was expecting it. Tonight we are going to go through the whole of it, start to finish, everything that happened between those 2 points. Not the plot of Adventure Time, the other thing that was happening underneath the plot for 10 years, in the same frames, which is that 2 people were having a friendship, and it went through everything a friendship goes through, and the show recorded all of it, and never once drew attention to what it was doing. Here is what that involves, so you know where we are going. We start before Finn exists, with Jake, in a house with a family in it, because Jake had a whole life first, and almost nobody thinks about that. There is a father, a mother, a brother, and an origin so strange that Jake himself does not learn the truth of it for years. Then the finding, then the childhood, which the show gives you in fragments and which we will assemble. Then the treehouse, and the years of ordinary days that make up most of what you actually remember. We will look closely at what those days consisted of, because the ordinary days are the friendship, and everything else is just what happened during it. Then the complications, Jake's other life, the one with a partner and 5 children in it, and what it cost him, and what it cost Finn. Finn's disasters, several of them, and what Jake did in the room while they were happening. The stretch where Finn was genuinely difficult to be around, and the show did not rescue him from it. Then the separations. There are more of them than you remember. They spend a surprising amount of the later seasons apart, or changed, or unable to reach each other, and every one of those stretches tells you something about what the connection was actually made of. Then the end of the world, and what the 2 of them did about it, which was not what you would expect. And then the part after the end, which is the part almost nobody has processed, because it arrived years later in pieces, and by then most people had stopped watching. That is the shape of it. It is late, and none of this is urgent, and you do not have to stay awake for all of it. Let us go back to before. Jake had a family. That is the first thing, and it is the thing that gets forgotten, because by the time you meet him, he is a fixture of the treehouse and appears to have arrived there fully formed. There was a house. There was a father called Joshua and a mother called Margaret, and they were adventurers, professionally, in a dangerous world. Joshua hunted demons. Margaret was a detective. They were not gentle people, and they were not soft parents, and they were, in their way, extremely committed to their children. And there was a brother, Jermaine, who is Joshua and Margaret's biological son, and who appears in perhaps 2 episodes across 10 seasons, and whose presence in the story is one of the quietest sad things in it. Now here is where it gets strange, and it is worth taking slowly, because Jake's origin is one of the odder pieces of backstory in animation, and the show delivers it with almost no ceremony. Jake is not Margaret's son in the ordinary sense. At some point before Jake existed, Joshua was on an adventure and encountered a creature, something not from around here, a shape-shifting thing with an agenda of its own, and in the course of that encounter, something got into Joshua, and it grew, and what eventually emerged was Jake. He came out of his father's head. That is the actual story, and the show tells it in a matter-of-fact way that makes it funnier and stranger than any dramatic version would be. Margaret raised him as her son, Joshua raised him as his son, and the fact of where he came from was kept from him, not maliciously. Joshua appears to have decided that Jake would be better off not knowing, that the knowledge would make him feel like an outsider in his own family, and that the kindest thing was to let him believe he was ordinary. And this is the first inheritance, and both of the people in this story get one. Jake grows up with a lie underneath him. He does not know it is there, but it means his powers, which are considerable and which nobody in the family shares, are never fully accounted for. He can become any shape at any size, and it is simply not discussed. He is a slightly impossible person, being raised as a normal one. The consequence of that, and I think it is a real one, is that Jake never learns to interrogate anything. He grows up in a house where the largest strange fact is not being examined, and he acquires, permanently, a relaxed relationship to the unexplained. Something is odd. Nobody is talking about it. That is fine. You will see that operating for 10 years afterward, in every situation where something impossible happens, and Jake is the only one not asking questions. There is a second thing about that household, and it belongs here rather than later, which is what happened to Jermaine. Jermaine stayed. When Jake grew up and went off to have a life, Jermaine remained at the family home, holding the responsibilities their father left behind. Joshua had trapped things over the course of his career, and those things needed guarding, and the guarding fell to one son and not the other, and Joshua died before anybody raised it with him. So there is a version of Jake's family in which the weight was distributed unevenly, and Jake is the one who came out light. That is not an accusation, and Jake did not engineer it, but it is worth having in your head for the rest of tonight, because the ease that makes Jake such an extraordinary friend was partly produced by somebody else carrying something on his behalf, and neither of them ever knew. When Jermaine and Jake are finally in a room together, years later, what comes out of Jermaine is resentment, and the resentment is aimed at Jake and is not really about Jake at all. It is about a father who assigned an enormous unstated burden to one child and not the other. That is the family. A father who is hard and loving and keeps secrets, a mother who is competent and warm, a brother who will be left holding it, and a son who came out of somebody's head and has never asked why he can turn into a bridge. That is the household that a baby is about to be found and brought into. Before the finding, one more thing about the household, because it is the piece that both of them inherit and neither of them examines. Joshua died before the series starts, and he kept parenting afterward. There is an episode that shows you what he built for them, an elaborate dungeon constructed before his death, full of traps and challenges, designed to be found later. Throughout it, there are recorded messages from him, taunting his sons, calling them names, pushing them toward the end. It is harsh, by any modern standard, genuinely harsh. He calls one of them a whiny baby and the other a joke. And it is also, unmistakably, love, delivered in the only register the man had. He believed in tough love, in the idea that criticism builds character and coddling creates weakness. At the end of it there is a weapon, made from a demon he trapped during his career, left for his sons to find. Consider what that gift is. It is not just a tool, it is an identity and an expectation and a piece of pressure reaching out from beyond a grave. Here is what I was. Here is what I assume you will be. Finn takes it up. And that is the moment, if you want one, where you can see the two of them diverge inside the same inheritance. Both boys are handed a legacy of monster hunting and toughness and emotional silence. One of them accepts the sword and becomes a hero. The other one takes the warmth, ignores the rest, and goes to make a sandwich. Nobody chooses which of those they are. That is the uncomfortable part. Two children in the same house, given the same instructions by the same man, and the instructions land completely differently, and neither of them decided it. Now, the finding. Here is what happened as the show gives it to us. Joshua and Margaret were out in a wood, and they found a human infant alone on the ground, in a state that the show describes with a great deal more comedic detail than is strictly necessary. He was not hidden. He was not left with a note. There was no arrangement. Somebody had been carrying a baby through a forest, and at some point had stopped carrying him. And the two of them looked at this, and picked him up, and took him home. Consider what that decision actually was. They were not young. They had 2 sons already, and one of them had just come out of a head. They lived in a dangerous world, and worked dangerous jobs. And the thing on the ground was not merely a baby, it was a human, which in the land of U is close to a mythological category. Nobody had seen one. There were none. They had no idea what he would need. They had no idea what he would grow into. There was no manual for raising a human because there were no humans. And they took him anyway, and the show plays it as a 2-minute flashback with jokes in it. That is the beginning of the friendship. And notice that neither of the 2 people in the friendship had any say in it. Jake did not choose Finn. Finn did not choose Jake. A pair of middle-aged adventurers made a decision in a wood, and 2 lives were welded together by it, which is how nearly all of the important ones start, if you look at yours honestly. Nobody chooses their family, and almost nobody chooses the friend they made at 5. The ones you actually chose, later, with judgment, on the basis of compatibility, are rarely the ones you would call at 3 in the morning. Jake was already there when Finn arrived. That is the fact that structures everything afterward. He was a few years older. He was already himself, and a baby came into the house and became, from Jake's perspective, simply a feature of the world he lived in the way a younger sibling is not a decision, but a condition. And Finn arrived into a family that was already running, with a father and a mother and 2 brothers and a set of ways of doing things, and he was the newest one, and he was the only one of his kind, and both of those things are going to matter for the rest of his life. Before the childhood, there is something in the first 10 seconds of every episode that we should deal with, because it has been telling you the answer since you were 9. The theme song begins with an invitation. Come along with me. That is not a heroic phrase. It is not a call to arms or a statement of purpose or a promise of destiny. It is somebody asking somebody else to come out with them, with no destination specified. You have heard that line hundreds of times. It is possibly the piece of this show most deeply embedded in you, and it is, word for word, the thing Jake spends 10 years saying. And the finale, the actual last episode, after 10 seasons, is called Come Along With Me. The show opens on that line and closes on that line and spends the middle following a boy who is trying to accomplish something, and the frame around him at both ends belongs to the other one. That is either an accident of songwriting or the whole thesis of the series stated twice at maximum volume in the 2 places nobody would look for it. And there is a related thing in the title itself, which is that the 2 of them mean different things by the word. When Finn says adventure, he means a quest. There is a somewhere to go, a something to be done there, a difficulty in the middle, and a state of the world afterward that differs from the state before. Adventure is a unit of accomplishment. When Jake says adventure, he means a day out. Watch him use the word. He applies it to going to get lunch. He applies it to visiting somebody. He applies it to leaving the house at all, with no destination, with the entire content of the adventure being that the 2 of them are outside together and something might happen. Same word, 2 definitions, never reconciled, in a show named after it. And the show's own title, when you have watched all of it, quietly belongs to Jake's definition rather than Finn's, because what you remember, at the end, is not the quests. Almost nobody's favorite episode is a quest. What you remember is the two of them somewhere, doing something minor, in good weather. There is one more thing about the arrival, and it is about what Jake did not do. He was, by the show's accounting, somewhere between a small child and a young adolescent when Finn was brought home, old enough to have a personality, old enough to have opinions about a new sibling appearing in the house. And there is no jealousy anywhere in the story. That is easy to miss because it is an absence, but the standard version of this arrangement, a new child arriving, attention redistributing, the older one adjusting badly, is so common that it is close to universal, and it is entirely missing here. The show does not even gesture at it. There is no flashback where young Jake resents the baby. There is no residual friction. It simply does not appear to have occurred to him that anything was being taken from him, which is consistent with everything else about him, and it is also the earliest evidence of it. If your presence in the world is not a question you are asking, then somebody else's presence is not a threat. Finn arrives into a house that had no scarcity in it, at least not from Jake's side, and that is the ground floor of the whole relationship. Compare Jermaine, who did have the sense of something being taken and who was right, and who is the only person in Jake's family who ever raises it. And there is a thing about the two adults in that wood that deserves a moment, because it sets the terms for everything. Joshua and Margaret did not have to do it. That is the fact underneath the whole series, and nobody says it. They had 2 children already. They were not young. They worked dangerous jobs in a dangerous world. Adding a third, one of an unknown species, with unknown needs, in a world that had never seen one, was a choice made in a wood by 2 tired people who could have walked on. And the reason it matters for tonight is that the entire friendship we are about to describe is downstream of it. Every afternoon on the hill, every sandwich, the whole decade, all of it exists because 2 people who are dead before the story starts made a decision that cost them and that nobody ever thanked them for. That is how most of the good things in anybody's life got there. Somebody did something inconvenient before you were paying attention, and by the time you were old enough to understand it, they were gone, or it was too long ago to bring up. The show gives Joshua and Margaret about 4 minutes of flashback across 10 seasons. Their actual contribution is the entire premise. Now the childhood, which the show gives you in pieces across 10 years, and never in one sequence, so let us assemble it. They were raised as brothers, not as a boy and his dog. The show is quite specific about this, and it matters. Finn believed, for years, that he and Jake were siblings in the ordinary sense, because that is what he was told, and nobody corrected it, which means the friendship began as a fiction that both parties believed, and there is something worth noticing there. Joshua's approach to family was to construct one and then not discuss the construction. Jake's origin was a secret. Finn's adoption was smoothed over. The household ran on a set of agreed-upon fictions, all of them well-intentioned, all of them protective, and all of them eventually discovered. What that produces is 2 people who are extremely close and slightly unclear on what they are to each other, and who never really resolve it. Across 10 seasons they call each other brother, and they are not brothers, and the word is doing something that no accurate word would do better. The training is the other half of it. Joshua raised his sons to survive. That meant combat, monster fighting, and a specific kind of emotional stoicism that the show is quite clear-eyed about. Suck it up was the implicit lesson. Real problems are handled alone and without complaint, and both of them absorbed it, and it lands differently on each, and the difference is one of the more interesting things in the whole story. Finn takes the fighting. He becomes a boy with a sword and a moral system, and an absolute conviction that problems can be solved by going at them. That is Joshua's curriculum, executed perfectly. Jake takes almost none of it. He can fight, he is enormously capable, and he demonstrably does not care. He absorbed the household's warmth and skipped the discipline, which is a thing children do, and which nobody can explain. But they both took the stoicism. That part landed on both of them, and it never comes off. Neither Finn nor Jake is any good at saying what is actually happening inside them. Finn expresses it by exploding at intervals. Jake expresses it by making a joke and changing the subject. Neither of them ever sits down and says a true thing about their own state in plain language, in 280 episodes. That is Joshua, still operating, decades after his death, in two people who loved him. There is an episode late on that shows you the dungeon Joshua built for them, before he died, to be found afterward. It is full of traps and challenges, and there are recorded messages from him throughout, taunting his sons, calling them names, pushing them. It is harsh. By any modern standard, it is genuinely harsh, and it is also, unmistakably, love, delivered in the only register the man had. And they both understand it as love. That is the thing. Neither of them is confused. They know what they were given, and they know what it cost them, and they do not seem to hold it against him. Now, the parents die. The show does not dwell on it, and it happens before the series starts. So by the time you meet them, the household is gone. Joshua and Margaret are dead. Jermaine is at the old house holding the weight, and the two of them are somewhere else entirely, in a tree, on their own. That is the situation at the top of episode 1. Two young people, one 12, one adult, orphaned, living in salvaged accommodation in a post-apocalyptic landscape, with a games console and no supervision. The show never once frames it that way. It frames it as a delight, and it is a delight, and it is also worth knowing what the arrangement actually was. Before the house, there is a question about those first years that the show answers obliquely, and that is worth assembling, which is, what was it like for Finn to be the only one? He is a human in a world with no humans. He is being raised by dogs who love him and who cannot, structurally, know what he is or what he needs. Now, the show is careful never to make this a tragedy. Joshua and Margaret are good parents by their own lights, and Finn's childhood is not depicted as deprived. He was fed, taught, loved, and included. But there is a category of thing that a parent provides, which is, I was also this. I remember being your age. Here is what happens next. Nobody in that house could give him that. Not one person in the entire world could give him that. And Jake could not either. And here is where it becomes relevant to the friendship. Jake is a magic dog with an origin he does not understand. He is arguably the second strangest being in the household. But he had a mother and father of his own species, and a brother of his own species, and a normal position in a family. Finn had none of that, and had it in a way that could not be fixed, and it is the thing underneath his entire search for other humans years later. So the friendship was never a friendship between equals in that respect. One of them belonged, and one of them was permanently a category of one, and the one who belonged did not appear to notice, because from Jake's side, nothing was strange about any of it. That is worth holding, because it explains something about why Finn accepted so readily that Jake was his brother, and why the fiction mattered so much, and why he kept using the word for a decade after the basis for it was gone. He was told he was somebody's brother. In a world where he was otherwise the last of everything, you would keep the word too. The treehouse deserves its own stretch, because it is the setting for most of what follows, and because there is a fact about it that almost nobody registers. It was Jake's first. He is older. He had a life before Finn was old enough to be in it. Finn moved into an arrangement that already existed, and the show is casual about this and never makes anything of it. And Jake never once plays the card. That is a very small restraint, held continuously for a decade, and it only becomes visible if you have lived with somebody. Because in 10 years of arguments about chores and space and who does what, there is never a moment where Jake says, "I was here first." There is no seniority invoked. There is no tally produced in a tired week. Anybody who has shared a home knows how rare that is. Now look at what is inside the house, because the set design is doing work. There is a television. There is a sofa, a refrigerator, shelves with objects on them, and every single item is salvage. It all came out of the world that ended. Somebody manufactured that television in a factory, in an economy, for money, and everyone involved has been dead for 1,000 years, and now it is a television in a tree. Neither of them knows this. Finn does not think of the television as an artifact. It is just the television. He has never known a world in which such things were made rather than found. And the room is, by an enormous margin, the coziest place in the series. That is the arrangement the whole show is built on, and it is stated entirely in furniture. Everything you love is made out of what is left. The house is built out of an extinction, and it is warm, and there is somebody in it making food. So, what did a day actually look like? This is worth doing properly, because the days are the friendship, and the plot is just what happened during it. They wake up, Jake later than Finn. There are several episodes that open with Finn already awake and impatient, waiting, and the show plays it as comedy, and it is also two people with completely different relationships to being unconscious. Jake makes food. That is nearly constant. He cooks elaborately and badly and often, and there is a whole song about a breakfast item that has outlived almost everything else the show produced. They go out. Something happens. It is usually not important. In the early seasons, the stakes are microscopic, and the treatment is enormous, and that mismatch is the source of most of the humor, and is also an accurate depiction of what things feel like from inside a childhood. They come home. That is the loop. Hundreds of times. And if you asked most people what they remember about Adventure Time, they would not describe a plot. They would describe that loop. There is a whole category of episode where nothing happens at all. No villain, no threat, no plot to speak of. Somebody wants a small thing. There is a minor difficulty. 11 minutes go by. There are dozens of them, scattered evenly across all 10 seasons. When they aired, those were the ones people skipped. They are the ones adults return to. And there is a pattern in them that is worth knowing about, which is that nearly all of them are Jake's. Look at who initiates. It is almost always Jake who wants the small thing, the nap, the sandwich, the particular arrangement of the afternoon. Finn gets dragged into them and participates with a puzzled goodwill and starts looking for a quest around minute 6. That is not filler. That is one person, over a decade, repeatedly arranging for the other one to be inside an ordinary afternoon. Whether Finn ever noticed is a question we will come back to at the end. There is a word problem sitting in the middle of this friendship, and it is worth a few minutes, because the show uses it constantly, and it is not accurate. They call each other brother. They are not brothers. Not biologically, obviously, but also not legally, and after the fictions of childhood came apart, not really in the sense they originally meant it either. Finn learns he was adopted. Jake learns where he came from. The formal basis for the word evaporates fairly early, and they keep using it for 10 years. Now, there is a reading where this is sentimental, where brother means we love each other so much that friend is not enough. That reading is available, and I do not think it is what is happening. Here is what I think the word is doing. Brother is the only available word for a relationship you did not choose and cannot leave. Friends are chosen and can be unchosen. Partners are chosen. Colleagues are assigned and temporary. Brother is the one category in ordinary English that means, this is permanent. It was decided by somebody else, and neither of us has a say. And that is accurate. Neither of them chose this. A pair of adventurers made a decision in a wood, and two lives were welded together. and by the time either of them was old enough to have an opinion, the arrangement was load-bearing. So the word is not sentiment, it is a description of the terms. And there is a version of this in your own life, which is why it lands. The people you would actually call at 3 in the morning are, almost always, not the ones you selected on the basis of compatibility. They are the ones you were put next to. School, family, the flat you shared at 22, the job you both hated. Proximity plus duration produces something that choice does not, and English has no word for it, so people borrow brother. Which is also why the show can get away with a boy and a dog. If it were about a chosen friendship, the species difference would be a joke you had to keep explaining. Because it is about an assigned one, it does not need explaining at all. Nobody asks why you love your brother. There is a third person in the house, and he should not be skipped. Bimo is the household's small one, and Bimo's relationship to both of them is different from their relationship to each other. Bimo stays. That is the structural fact. Finn and Jake go out, things happen, they come home, and Bimo is there, having cleaned, having cooked, having played elaborate games alone with an invented cast of characters. When you are young, you do not think about the waiting at all. Bimo is the funny little one who says funny things. When you are older, you notice that a substantial portion of Bimo's screen time is Bimo alone in a house, inventing company. And it is not played for sadness, it is charming, and it is also one of the more accurate depictions of a particular kind of solitude that television has produced. Not lonely, occupied. Bimo matters for tonight, because Bimo is the witness. 1,000 years later, when everything else is over, Bimo is the one who remembers and tells it. We will get there. Now let us look at the actual mechanics of what Jake does inside this friendship, because it is a method, and it took me a long time to see it. Jake is funny more or less constantly. That is his register, and the standard reading is that he is the comic relief, a structural role, which means this character exists to lower tension so the audience can rest. That reading is correct about the effect and wrong about the target. Jake's jokes are not aimed at the audience. Watch where they land. They land on Finn, in the moment, when Finn is winding up. There is an extremely consistent pattern in which Finn is escalating internally, getting tighter, heading toward the state where he does something with a sword, and Jake says something ridiculous, and the escalation breaks. That is not comic relief. That is an intervention, delivered as a joke, because a joke is the only thing that gets past the defenses of a person in that state. If you tell somebody who is spiraling that they are spiraling, they spiral harder. If you say something stupid about a sandwich, the machinery has to stop for half a second to process it, and half a second is frequently enough. Anybody who has managed an anxious person knows this technique, and knows it cannot be explained to the person you are using it on, because explaining it destroys it. So Jake spends 10 years operating on his best friend with a tool his best friend cannot know about, and Finn thinks Jake is just being Jake. There is one sentence that got through. Only one, as far as I can tell, and it is the most quoted thing in the series. Jake says, in passing, that being bad at something is the first step toward being sort of good at something. It is a throwaway. There is no music. He is not making a speech. And it landed, permanently, on Finn, and you can watch him operating on it for years afterward. He tries things he is bad at. He does not treat early incompetence as a verdict. He has an unusual tolerance for being visibly terrible at something in front of other people, which is a genuinely rare quality and did not come from nowhere. So why did that one get through when nothing else did? Because it is compatible. It does not challenge anything Finn believes. It just improves the method. It says you can still become worthy, and here is a better route. It is an optimization. Everything else Jake knows is a contradiction, and a person cannot receive information that contradicts their central operating belief, because the belief is the thing doing the receiving. Hold on to that. It comes back at the end. Before we get to the objects, there is a structural fact about the show that shaped how this friendship was depicted, and it explains why it feels the way it does. Adventure Time is made of 11-minute episodes. That was a production decision as much as an artistic one, and it shaped everything. An 11-minute story cannot have a subplot. It cannot build slowly. It has room for one idea and one turn, and then it has to be finished. Now think about what that does to a friendship depicted over 10 years. It means you almost never get an episode about the friendship. There is no room. There is barely room for the thing that happens, let alone for anybody to reflect on what it means to them. So the relationship is never the subject. It is always the medium. It is the thing the 11 minutes happen inside, and it accumulates in the background, one small deposit at a time, across nearly 300 episodes. That is why you cannot point to the episode where they became close. There isn't one. There was no room for one. And it is also why the memory of this show feels like a texture rather than a story. You do not remember a relationship arc because you were never shown one. You were shown 280 ordinary interactions, and your brain did the integration by itself without being asked, over 8 years of your own life. There is a second effect of the format, and it is about how the show delivers its heavier material. 11 minutes is too short to prepare you. In a 45-minute drama, you can see the sad part coming from a long way off. The music shifts. A character gets a scene alone. The grammar of the medium warns you, and the warning is a courtesy. 11 minutes has no room for the warning. The show gets 4 minutes of setup, 4 minutes of business, and then it has 3 minutes left to do whatever it is actually doing, and it does it at full strength, and then stops. There is no descent and no recovery. You are laughing at minute 6, and the floor is gone at minute 8, and the credits are running at minute 11. That is the mechanism behind the thing that happens to you on a rewatch. It is why it feels like being ambushed rather than being moved. And applied to this friendship specifically, it means the moments where the depth shows are all about 4 seconds long. A look, a line delivered slightly differently, Jake saying something that is not a joke, and then immediately following it with one. You have to be paying close attention to catch them, and at 9 you were not, and now you are. There are 2 objects in this friendship that are doing philosophical work, and they belong together, because they are the clearest statement the show ever makes about the difference between these 2 people. Finn has a sword, several, over time, and a sword is not just a weapon. A sword is a theory about problems. If you carry one, then problems are things with an outside and an inside, and the correct operation is to get through the outside. Problems have a location. They can be approached. There is a moment at which a problem is resolved, and after that moment it is over. That is a theory, and it is a good theory, and it works on a surprising number of things when you are 12. Watch how Finn handles anything at all in the early seasons. Somebody is sad. He identifies the cause and goes to it. There is a curse. He finds the thing to hit. His method is completely consistent and has an extraordinary success rate for about 3 seasons, which is exactly long enough to become permanent. Jake does not have a sword. Jake has the ability to be any shape. And here is where the show's central metaphor does something almost nobody notices, because the stretching looks like a power and is actually a philosophy. Consider what he does with the ability to become anything. He becomes a bridge when a bridge is needed. He becomes a container. He becomes a shield around Finn, a set of stairs, a boat, a large hand, a room, and then, when the thing is over, he goes back to being a dog on a couch. That is the pattern, and it is consistent for 10 years. He takes the shape the moment requires, exactly, and then he stops taking it. He has no preferred form he is trying to achieve, no project of becoming, no ambition regarding his own power whatsoever, which, if you think about it, is close to unique among characters with a superhuman ability. He also does not become more than is needed. He does not turn the ability into an identity. So, Finn approaches a situation with a fixed instrument and asks what can be done to the situation with the instrument he has. Jake approaches a situation by becoming what the situation requires and then reverting. Two theories of how a person meets the world, drawn as visual metaphors, running side by side in the same frame every week for a decade, and the show never once points at either of them. And there is a hard fact underneath all of it that changes the whole picture once you see it. Jake is stronger than Finn. Not marginally, substantially, obviously, by any measure. A person who can become any shape at any size is more powerful than a boy with a sword by a very large margin, and the show establishes this repeatedly and casually, and then does nothing with it. And Jake never once seems to notice. He does not lead. He does not take over. In situations that are clearly beyond Finn's ability, Jake helps and then hands it back. He treats Finn as the one doing this, permanently, for 10 years, in the face of continuous evidence that he could do it better himself. At 9, you do not register this at all, because Finn is the hero and heroes are the strongest. Later you understand that you have been watching an adult let a child be in charge of something, at some cost, on purpose, for the child's benefit, without ever mentioning it. Anyone who has done that with a younger person knows exactly how much restraint it takes, and how invisible it is by design. You have to keep your hands off it. You have to let them do it worse than you would. You have to be genuinely available and genuinely not in charge, at the same time, continuously. Jake does that for a decade, and nobody in the show ever thanks him, because nobody in the show ever notices, because it is working. The way they fight is the same argument in another costume, and it is short. Finn fights to win, obviously. That is what a fight is. Jake fights to end the fight. Those sound like the same thing, and are not. Watch Jake in combat and count how often he actually attacks. He is much more likely to contain, to block, to absorb, to physically remove the two parties from each other, to become a wall between things. His enormous power is used almost entirely defensively across 10 seasons, and nobody remarks on it. He is not a pacifist. He will hit something if hitting it is required, but his instinct in a conflict is to reduce it rather than to resolve it in his favor, and that is a different instinct, and most people do not have it, which makes him worse at fighting, narrowly, and better at conflict, broadly. There are episodes where a situation is diffused entirely because Jake got in the middle of it and made it inconvenient to continue. Finn cannot do that, because from inside Finn's theory, a fight that is diffused rather than won is a fight that has not been dealt with. It will come back. Better to settle it now. Both positions have merit, and the show does not adjudicate, but it is worth noticing which of them ends up with more people still willing to talk to him. Now the early seasons proper, and the first real test of what this friendship is for. Finn falls in love, repeatedly, and every single time the show handles it in a way that is unusual for children's television, which is that it lets him be genuinely bad at it. He is possessive. He is dishonest in small ways he does not recognize as dishonest. He builds an idea of a person and is then disappointed that the person is not the idea. There is a relationship that ends because he cannot stop trying to manage it, wanting a specific outcome so badly that he cannot leave the other person alone long enough for the outcome to happen naturally. When you are 12 watching this, it is uncomfortable and slightly boring, and you want to get back to the adventure. When you are 30 watching it, you recognize every move, because you made all of them at approximately the age he is making them. And the question for tonight is, what does Jake do while this is happening? The answer is almost nothing, and it is the correct almost nothing. He does not fix it. He does not lecture. He very rarely gives advice, and when he does, it is usually strange and unhelpful in a way that is somehow exactly right. Mostly he is just there, being fine, at a volume that makes it possible for Finn to not be fine. Watch it happen a few times and the pattern is unmistakable. Finn's heart is broken. Jake makes food. Finn is humiliated. Jake suggests something completely irrelevant. Finn is raging about something. Jake is on the sofa. And it works. Over and over. Across 10 years. It works. And the show never explains why. Here is why. The content was never the point. What the person in the room needed was not a solution and not an insight. What they needed was for somebody else to be present and to be deliberate about the fact that they are having a hard time. The sandwich is not a sandwich. The sandwich is evidence that somebody is paying attention. That is the primary service Jake provides for a decade, and it does not look like anything. From the outside, it looks like a guy who cooks a lot. Before that, we should stay on the ordinary days a little longer, because they are the bulk of what happened, and they deserve more than a paragraph. Start with food, because Jake cooks, and it is not a character quirk. Jake makes food constantly. It is possibly his most consistent behavior across 10 seasons, more consistent than the stretching. He makes elaborate things and bad things, and one specific breakfast item that has become the single most recognizable thing about him in the entire culture around this show, on the strength of a song lasting about 20 seconds. And what cooking is, structurally, is the whole of Jake's philosophy performed as a physical act. It takes time, and the time is the point. It cannot be rushed and does not benefit from urgency. It produces something that is consumed immediately and leaves nothing behind. It is a total waste of an afternoon by any accounting that measures accomplishment, and it is one of the more reliable ways human beings have found to be all right. And it is done for somebody. Jake does not cook alone often. He cooks, and then there is a person eating it, and the eating is the transaction, and nothing has been fixed and nobody has been improved, and the day has gone well. Finn eats what Jake makes and does not cook. That is not a criticism. He is a child for most of the series, but notice that he never picks it up. 10 years of somebody producing food in front of him, and he does not become a person who produces food, because cooking, to somebody running Finn's program, is time not spent on the thing that matters. The song about the breakfast is 30 seconds long, and it is about a man being pleased with a small thing he has made. It has outlived almost everything else the show produced. There is a reason for that, and it is not that it is catchy. Then there is the instrument, which is a running gag and is also the neatest summary of the character available. Jake plays the viola. Badly. He has played it for years. He does not improve in any noticeable way across 10 seasons. He is not taking lessons. He is not working toward anything. He picks it up. He makes some sound. He puts it down. And he enjoys it completely. Now think about what a person running Finn's program does with a hobby. They get better at it. That is what a hobby is for. It goes into the file as evidence. There is progress, and the progress is the pleasure. And an activity that produces no improvement starts to feel like waste. An enormous number of adults cannot do anything they are not getting better at. They will tell you they have no hobbies. And what they mean is that they have no activities that survive the absence of measurable progress. Jake has been mediocre at the viola for a decade, and it has never once occurred to him to mind. And there is a worm living in it. That is the other part, and it is one of the strangest small facts in the show. There is a worm called Shelby, who lives inside Jake's viola. He has been in there for years. Jake knows. Jake is not bothered. He is hosting an entire other conscious creature in his instrument, and it does not require comment. That is a very silly detail, and it is also the most concise possible statement of the character. Something has moved into your stuff. It is a whole person. It has opinions. Fine. It is a nice day. There is one more thing about the ordinary days, which is what happens when there is nothing to do. Finn gets restless within about 4 minutes. He starts looking for something. He invents a quest if there is not one available. There are entire episodes whose plot is Finn being unable to tolerate an afternoon with no problem in it, going out to find one, and finding one, and it going badly. That is not a personality quirk. That is a person who cannot be at rest, because rest raises a question he does not want asked. And you know where the question comes from, because the show tells you plainly and early, before you have any way of knowing what you are being told. Finn was left in the woods. Somebody had him and did not keep him, and he was found by dogs who loved him completely. And none of that answers the thing that sits at the bottom of him, which is whether he was worth keeping. A child who has that question does not usually know they have it. What they have instead is a program running underneath everything, which says, be worth it, be useful, be so good that the question does not come up. That is Finn's entire operating system. He is going to be so unmistakably worth keeping that the original evidence is overturned. And because the question cannot actually be answered by any amount of heroism, he will never be finished, and every quest completed will be immediately followed by the need for another one. Jake was not left anywhere. Jake was born into a family that had him on purpose. There is a mother and a father and a brother. There is a house he grew up in. He was, from the beginning, a person whose presence in the world did not require explanation, and he has never had to think about it, in the same way you do not think about the floor. That difference is the engine of everything else in this story. Every contrast we have drawn tonight, and every one still to come, runs off it. Now, Jake's other life, which is the complication, and which most people underrate. Jake is in a long-term relationship for essentially the whole run of the show. Lady Rainicorn, and it is one of the least dramatized romantic relationships in animation, which is the point of it. There is no will they, won't they. There is no crisis. There is no episode where it nearly ends and is saved. They are together, they like each other, they spend time, and the show treats this as unremarkable and does not mine it for plot. And here is the choice that makes it interesting. Lady speaks a language most of the audience cannot understand, for the entire series without subtitles. You are locked out. You can hear the tone and read the body language and catch Jake's responses, and the content is unavailable, which means their relationship is the only major relationship in the series that you cannot analyze. There is no transcript. All you have is two figures who appear to be doing fine over a very long period in a private language. That is either a gag that got out of hand or one of the smarter things in the show, and I think it is the second, because of what it does to your model of Jake. The character who seems to have nothing hidden has a locked room in the middle of his life, and you are never given the key. Now put that next to Finn. Finn's romantic life is a series of intense events with clear beginnings and painful ends, each of which is a whole arc, each of which changes him. Jake's is a thing he is in. Two models. Finn's relationships happen to him. Jake's is a place he lives. And Finn watches this at close range for a decade and does not appear to learn anything from it either, which is consistent because there is nothing to see. It looks like nothing. It looks like two people who are fine. There is a stretch about work that belongs here, because it is the one time the show puts the arrangement under economic pressure and the results are revealing. Nobody in the main cast has a job. That is worth stating because it is unusual and it is a choice. Finn and Jake do not work. There is no income. They live in a tree they did not buy, eating food that arrives from somewhere, in an economy the show declines to explain. For most of the run, this is simply the premise. Then the rent arrives, and the two of them have to get jobs. And what happens is instructive. Finn is fine with it. He takes to work immediately, because work is a structure with tasks in it, and he is a person who runs on tasks. He is quite good at it. He finds it satisfying in a low-grade way. Jake is miserable. Not dramatically. He is just diminished by it, visibly, and the show draws him slightly smaller and slower for the whole sequence. That reads at first as Jake being work-shy, and it is more specific than that. What is being taken from him is not effort. Jake works hard at plenty of things. What is being taken is the unstructured day, the thing he actually requires. The substrate of his entire way of being is a large quantity of time that has not been allocated. And this is where it stops being about cartoons. Because most adults do not have that, and did not choose not to have it, and the loss of it is the single largest change between being 9 and being 35. Not responsibility exactly, the disappearance of unallocated hours. Jake's posture requires a resource that most of the audience does not possess, that has to be said plainly, or the whole thing becomes a lecture delivered from a treehouse to people with commutes. You cannot simply choose to be at ease if your hours are spoken for. But there is something usable in it anyway. The unallocated time you do have is more valuable than you are treating it as. Almost everybody with a small amount of it spends it on things that are also allocated, improving something, preparing, catching up. Genuinely unallocated time, the kind Jake runs on, is the rarest resource an adult has, and most people convert theirs into more of the other kind at the first opportunity. That is the practical residue of this whole episode, if there is one. Not, be like Jake. Just, some of your free hours are being quietly annexed, and you are the one doing it. There is a small structural fact about the treehouse worth noting before we get to the family, because it is where the whole arrangement lives, and it has one property nobody discusses. There is no adult in it. Joshua and Margaret are dead. Jermaine is elsewhere. There is no authority, no supervision, no curfew, and no rules that anybody has written down. Two young people and a games console in a tree, running a household by consensus. And it works, for years, with almost no friction. Now, that would not work with most pairs. A house with no rules is a house that discovers, fairly quickly, exactly how much each occupant is prepared to leave undone, and the discovery is usually unpleasant. The reason it works here is that Jake fills the gap without ever occupying it. He is the older one, and he behaves like the older one. He cooks, he keeps the place going. He is the one who notices when something has gone wrong, and he does not once claim the authority that ordinarily comes attached to that role. He does the parenting and declines the parent position. That is a rare combination, and it is what makes the treehouse feel the way it feels. Finn is being looked after and is not being managed. He has an entirely free hand, and there is always food, which is, if you want a definition, roughly what a good home is, and most people do not get it, and Finn got it from a dog with no plan. Then the children, and this is where the story gets harder on Jake, and the show does not protect him. Jake and Lady have 5. Charlie, TV, Viola, Kim Kil-1, and Jake Jr., and they grow to adulthood in a matter of days. That is what Rainicorn dog hybrids do, and it is nobody's fault, and it is a genuine misfortune. Jake is denied the extended childhood that defines most of the parenting experience. He misses the first steps, and the first words, and the gradual development into independent people, because there was no gradual, there was a week. By the time Jake has properly understood that he is a father, his children are adults with opinions about him. What is his fault is what he did with the years afterward, which was not very much. He is not cruel to them. He is not absent in the dramatic sense. He is fond of them, in a general way, at a distance, and he has not thought about them very hard, and he has not made himself available in any structured way. And eventually, one of them arrives with a grievance. The episode is about real estate. That is the surface. Kim Kil-won, the most conventionally successful of the five, buys the treehouse and uses the ownership to try to force his father into being responsible. There is a business plot. When it aired, most people found it slow. Here is what is actually in it. The grievance is correct. That is the part the show does not soften. Kim Kil-won is annoying and officious and wrong about a number of things, and about this one central thing he is completely right. His father was not there in any way that counts, and his father does not have a good answer because he has not been paying attention. And here is the cost, stated plainly, because it is the most important thing in this whole episode, and it is about the friendship. The thing that makes Jake an extraordinary friend is the same thing that makes him a mediocre father. Being at ease, not needing outcomes, declining problems, living in the afternoon. Every one of those, applied to a friendship with a boy who needs somebody unbothered next to him, is a gift of enormous value. Every one of them, applied to 5 children who needed somebody to structure their early life, is a failure. You cannot have the ease without the cost. The show says that without a single line of commentary, there is just a man being confronted by his son in an episode about property and having nothing to say. There is a thing about how each of them handles being wrong that belongs here, because it is the clearest small difference in the whole story. Finn takes it hard, every single time. Being wrong is not information to Finn, it is evidence, and the evidence goes into the file he has been keeping since the woods. He apologizes intensely and disproportionately, and then tries to earn it back. Jake is wrong constantly, and it costs him nothing at all. He will state something confidently, be corrected, accept the correction, and continue at exactly the same volume, with no residue. He does not appear to store it. There is no accumulating record of Jake's errors inside Jake. And that is not arrogance, which is the obvious misreading. Arrogance would be refusing the correction. He takes it cheerfully. He simply does not experience having been wrong as a fact about his worth. The consequence for the friendship is enormous, and it is invisible, because it means Finn can be wrong in front of Jake without paying for it. Jake does not keep score, so there is no score to be on the bad end of. A person who does not maintain a ledger about you is a person you can be a fool in front of, and there are very few of them, and they are the ones you tell things to. 10 years of being allowed to be wrong without it going on a record. That is most of what a home is. And there is a version of this that reframes Finn, which we should do now rather than at the end. Finn's restlessness, the thing that will not let him sit still, that makes him accept every problem within perception, that we could easily spend 2 hours calling a wound, is also the reason he shows up. Jake would not have noticed. Jake, left to himself, would have had a lovely decade and helped almost nobody, because helping requires you to be bothered, and being bothered is precisely what he does not do. So they are 2 settings of the same dial. Each buys something at the price of something else, and the show put them in the same house so you could see both bills. There is one more piece of Jake's life that Finn is not in, and it is the best evidence in the series about what Jake actually is. At the center of the multiverse, there is a room outside of time, and in it there is a pink 2-dimensional entity called Prismo, who grants wishes and who is, it turns out, a shadow cast by an old man dreaming somewhere else entirely. And Jake goes to hang out with him. That is the relationship. Jake, who has no particular business at the center of reality, goes there, and they do nothing. They have snacks. They talk about not very much. There is no quest attached, no reason for the visit, no outcome sought. an entity with the power to reorganize existence, and a dog in a room outside of time, having an ordinary afternoon. Finn is not there. This is Jake's own thing, conducted separately, and Finn does not seem especially aware of it, which confirms something important. Jake's posture is not a service he provides. He is not being easy for Finn's benefit. He is like this on his own time, with cosmic entities, where nobody is watching and there is nobody to model anything for. And there is a second thing, which is what Prismo gets out of it. Prismo is enormously powerful and enormously alone. Everybody who comes to see him wants something. That is the design of his existence. People arrive, they want a wish. He grants or refuses, they leave. He is a function that other people call. And then a dog turns up who does not want anything. That is why Prismo likes him. Not because Jake is interesting. He is not especially. Because Jake is the only visitor in the history of the universe who came by to see how he was doing. If you have ever been the competent one in a group, the one people come to when they need something, you know exactly what that is worth. The friend who calls when they do not need anything is a completely different category of person, and there are usually about two of them. Prismo dies, eventually, or ceases, and the mechanics are strange, and it is indirectly Jake's doing. And Jake grieves, properly, visibly, in a way that is not funny and does not get a joke. That matters, because we have been building a picture of somebody to whom nothing sticks, and it would be easy to conclude he does not feel things deeply. He does. The absence of anxiety does not produce a person who is unmoved. It produces a person who is unburdened, and those are different. Jake loses somebody, and it hurts him exactly as much as it would hurt anyone. He simply does not add anything to it. No second layer of self-assessment about whether he handled it correctly. No accounting of what he should have done. That is grief without the machinery attached. And most people have never seen it, and assume the machinery is part of the grief. It is not. It is optional equipment, and most of us were issued it early. There is a whole area of the friendship that is easy to miss because it is embarrassing, which is that they play. Not adventure, play. Games, invented on the spot, with rules that do not survive scrutiny. Bits they do. Voices. An entire private comedic vocabulary built up over a decade that is completely impenetrable from outside. The show is full of this, and most of it is not plot relevant in any way. There are minutes and minutes across 10 seasons of two people doing a stupid thing together for no reason. And it is the single strongest evidence for what the relationship actually is, because playing requires something that almost nothing else requires, which is the total absence of self-consciousness. You cannot be silly in front of somebody you are being assessed by. It is not possible. The moment there is any evaluation in the room, the play stops, instantly, and it does not come back. So a friendship that contains a decade of unbroken silliness is a friendship in which neither party has ever felt evaluated by the other. That is enormously rare. And it is the thing people mean when they say they can be themselves around somebody. And it is why the ordinary episodes hold up better than the epic ones. And it is also age-specific in a way the show is honest about. The playing thins out in the later seasons. Not because anything went wrong. Because Finn is 17, and 17-year-olds do less of it, and Jake follows his lead rather than pushing. Which is its own small loss, unmarked. Like the bedroom. There is a category of thing that happens between them roughly 40 times across the series, and it deserves naming, which is that Jake gives Finn presents. They are bad, systematically. He gives things Finn did not want, things Jake wanted, things that are mostly for him, things he made badly in an afternoon. And Finn is pleased anyway, which is the interesting part, and it is not politeness. Because a gift carries two pieces of information, and only one of them is the object. The other is how much attention was paid, and there is a whole class of gift, the expensive, well-chosen, appropriate one, that carries a great deal of the first, and almost none of the second, and everybody can tell. Jake's gifts are terrible, and they are unmistakably from Jake. He made this. He thought of Finn while making it. He got it wrong in a way that could only have been got wrong by somebody actually trying. And there is a related thing about how he celebrates. Jake is enthusiastic about Finn's small achievements at a volume that seems excessive and is not. When Finn does something minor and it goes well, Jake is pleased about it out of all proportion. That is a genuine skill, and it is undervalued. Most people calibrate their enthusiasm to the significance of the event, which seems reasonable and is actually a mistake, because the significance of an event to the person who had it is not visible from outside and is usually higher than it looks. Jake overshoots by default, and overshooting is the correct error to make. Finn calibrates. He is proportionate. He is sincere and measured, and he gets the level right. And getting the level right means that a person who was quietly quite pleased about something small receives a proportionate response and feels slightly foolish for having been pleased. Such a small mechanism, and it accounts for an enormous amount of how it feels to be around somebody. There is one more of these, and it is about receiving rather than giving. Finn is uncomfortable being given things. Watch him when somebody thanks him properly or does something generous for him unprompted. He deflects, he minimizes, he redirects to what still needs doing. That is not modesty. A person whose existence feels provisional cannot comfortably accept a gift because a gift is unearned by definition, and unearned things do not settle the account, they complicate it. Jake receives beautifully. He is delighted. He accepts things with no hesitation and no discount, and he does not immediately reciprocate, which is not rudeness. It is the absence of a ledger. Somebody gave him a thing, and it was nice, and now he has the thing. Being able to receive is a genuine skill, and almost nobody names it. If you know somebody who cannot be given anything without discomfort, you know how tiring it is to be generous to them, and you probably know that after a while you stop trying. That is a hidden cost of Finn's condition, and Jake is the one person who never stops trying, for 10 years, badly, with terrible presence. There is a question underneath all of this that we should ask outright, because it changes the reading. What does Finn think Jake is? Not what Jake is, what Finn's model of him is, because they are different, and the gap between them is where the failure to transmit lives. Finn loves Jake without reservation. That is established constantly and never complicated. But watch how Finn describes him in the moments where he does. Jake is his brother. Jake is the funny one. They is the one who is always there. Jake is, in Finn's account, essentially a quality of the environment. Weather that is always good. He does not describe Jake as a person with a position. He does not appear to think of Jake as having an approach to life at all, in the way you would think of a philosopher or a mentor as having one. Jake is just how Jake is. And that is exactly the problem, and it is not Finn's fault, because Jake presents no evidence of having a position. A position requires a stance, and a stance requires a thing you are standing against, and Jake is not against anything. There is an ordinary version of this in most people's lives. There is somebody, usually a parent or an older sibling or a very old friend, whose way of being you regard as simply their personality, and who is in fact enacting a whole philosophy that you could adopt, and you never see it as available because you have categorized it as a fact about them rather than an option. You only see it as an option later, usually when they are gone and you find yourself doing it and wonder where it came from. And the other side of it is quieter. What does Jake think Finn is? Here the show gives us less, but enough. Jake is proud of Finn, constantly. He is proud in a way that has no envy in it, which is unusual around somebody younger and more celebrated. And he is proud of things Finn does that Jake would never do himself. That is the second half of what makes him a good friend, and it is rarer than the ease. He does not need Finn to be like him. He has no project of converting Finn. He is not, in fact, trying to teach Finn anything at all, which is why the afternoons work as well as they do. If Jake were trying to teach him, the afternoons would be lessons, and Finn would feel them as lessons, and it would fail immediately and unpleasantly. Jake gets closer than any instruction ever could, precisely because he is not instructing. He just wants to have lunch, and he wants to have it with Finn, and the fact that having lunch with somebody who is at ease is the only known transmission mechanism for ease is not something Jake has ever thought about for a second. There is something else in the pairing that only becomes visible if you count the years, so let us count them. Finn is roughly 12 when the show begins, and roughly 17 when it ends. That is 5 years of story across 10 seasons. Jake is an adult for all of it. He does not develop the way Finn develops. He is essentially the same person in the last episode as in the first, and this is normally a criticism of a character, and here it is the design. Because that is what it is like to be the older one in a friendship with a large age gap. You are the constant. The other person is going through the most transformative 5 years of their life, and you are having a normal 5 years, and from your side the friendship feels stable, and from their side, it is one of the primary forces shaping them. Jake does not know he is doing that. He thinks he has a friend. He does not think of himself as an environmental condition of somebody else's adolescence. And Finn does not know it either, because you never know it at the time. You find out at about 30 when you catch yourself doing something and realize where you got it, which means the central relationship of the entire show is asymmetrical in a way neither party can perceive, and the asymmetry is invisible from both ends, and the show never mentions it once. There is a consequence of that, which applies directly to your own life. Somebody is currently a constant for you. Somebody's ordinary steady presence is doing something to your shape that neither of you can see, and you are, simultaneously, a constant for somebody else, doing the same thing to them, without knowing what it is you are transmitting. You cannot audit that. There is no way to find out. The only thing you can do about it is the thing Jake does, which is to be reasonably all right on a regular basis around people who are younger than you, and to accept that you will never learn what it did. There is one more thing about the early years that is worth having before the difficult part, because it is the last of the good weather. The show does an episode, fairly early, where the two of them are separated for a short time, and Finn is fine. That is the whole content of it. He manages. He is not distraught. He does his thing, and Jake does his thing, and they meet up later. And I mention it because it establishes something the rest of the series depends on, which is that this is not a dependency. There is a version of this relationship that would be much less appealing and much more common in fiction, where the smaller one cannot function without the larger one, and the larger one is needed, and the need is the bond. That is not what is happening here. Finn can operate alone. He does it regularly. He is a capable person who happens to live with somebody, which means the thing keeping them together for 10 years is not necessity. Nobody is stuck. Neither of them is being carried. They just prefer it. That is a much weaker force than dependency, and it is the only one worth anything, because a bond made of need dissolves the moment the need does, and a bond made of preference has to be rechosen every single morning for a decade. They rechose it every morning for a decade. That is the entire achievement, and it does not look like an achievement, which is why nobody talks about it. Now we come to the middle of the series, and the stretch where the friendship is tested properly for the first time. Because up to a point, everything we have described is a friendship in good weather. Nothing has genuinely gone wrong. Finn has had his heart broken a few times, and Jake has made him a sandwich, and it has worked. There is a smaller test that comes before the big one, and it is worth doing because it shows the friendship working correctly under pressure that is survivable. Finn goes through a stretch of losing things at an ordinary rate, not catastrophes, failures, a relationship that ends badly and is his fault, a situation he handles poorly and cannot undo, a person he disappoints. And what Jake does in those cases is instructive, because it is different from what he does later. He teases him, not cruelly. He makes light of it, at exactly the right level, at exactly the right moment, and the effect is to tell Finn that the thing is survivable and is not the end of his standing as a person. That is a specific and quite skilled operation, and most people get it wrong in one direction or the other. Too early and you have dismissed somebody's pain. Too late and the thing has calcified into an identity. Jake has almost perfect timing on this for 10 years, and never once appears to be timing anything. And here is the piece that matters. He only does it for the survivable ones. When the thing is genuinely large, when it is the father, when it is the arm, when it is the stretch where Finn is not all right, Jake does not tease. He goes quiet and available and stays there. He does not appear to make that distinction consciously. There is no scene where he weighs whether this is a joking situation. He simply gets it right, over and over, on instinct, in a way that most people with much better emotional vocabulary get wrong regularly. That is worth naming because we have spent a lot of tonight describing Jake as somebody who does not think about things. That is true, and it is not the same as being unskilled. There is a kind of competence that lives entirely below the level of decision, and it is the most reliable kind there is, and it cannot be taught to somebody who does not have it. Then Finn meets his father. The setup is long. Finn spends most of the early series believing he is alone in a particular way. He is the only human he knows of. He was found in the woods and raised by dogs who loved him completely, and that love is real, and the show never undercuts it, and it still does not answer the question that sits at the bottom of him, which is whether he was worth keeping. Then he learns his father is alive, and he goes to find him. You would expect the show to make a meal of this. There is an obvious version where the reunion is the emotional peak of the series, where things are said, where either forgiveness or refusal happens in a big scene. That is not what happens. What happens is that Finn finds his father, and his father is not interested, not cruel exactly, and not sorry either, just entirely occupied with his own escape, treating his son as an obstacle in a hallway. Finn tries to hold on to him, and in the attempt, he loses an arm. His father leaves anyway. The show does not give the moment a swell or a speech. It just happens, fast, and then it is over, and Finn is standing there with one arm and no father. And Jake is present for all of it. That is the thing I want to draw attention to, because it is easy to miss. Jake is right there. He watches his brother meet the man who abandoned him, get nothing, and lose a limb in the process. And there is nothing he can do. There is no version of this that Jake's method addresses. You cannot make somebody a sandwich about this. Watch what he does anyway. He is around. He is present at a constant temperature. He does not confront Finn. He does not stage an intervention. He does not deliver a speech about how Finn is better off. What follows is the hardest stretch in the series, and it is worth being honest about it. There is a period, somewhere in the middle seasons, where Finn is not likable. This is not accidental. He becomes angry and self-involved and manipulative in small ways, and he does things that are genuinely poor, and the show does not rescue him from it or explain it away. What is happening is that his method has stopped working, and he does not have another one. He has just learned things about his father that cannot be fixed. He is carrying an injury with no external cause to defeat. And a person whose entire theory is that problems have an outside and can be got through, when handed a problem with no outside, will start applying the method to whatever is nearest. What is nearest is usually other people. You have seen this happen to somebody. Possibly you have been the one it happened to. The person who is competent and driven and generous, meeting the first thing in their life that competence does not touch, and going through a period where they are extremely difficult to be around, not because they have become worse, but because their one tool is being applied to something it cannot cut. And Jake does very little. Now that is either the best possible response or a failure to act, and the show leaves it genuinely ambiguous, which I think is correct. A better friend might have said something. A different friend would have made it worse. Jake does the only thing available to a person with his equipment, which is to remain present at a constant temperature until the weather changes. It does change. Finn comes out the other side. Whether that is because of Jake or merely alongside Jake is not knowable, by us or by them, which is also true of most of the times somebody has helped you. There is a thing about the arm that belongs here. Finn does not get it back in the ordinary sense. What he gets is a series of replacements, each one strange, each one a compromise, and he adapts to each in turn. And what is striking is that Finn's body becomes a record. Everything that has happened to him is on him. There is no version of Finn after a certain point that is not visibly carrying evidence of what he went through. Jake has no marks and cannot have marks. He reshapes, so nothing is written on him. Whatever happens to him is gone from his body the moment it is over. That is the same distinction again, made in flesh. One of them accumulates and one does not. One is a record and one is a surface. And the show does not say either is better. Finn's marks are a burden, and they are also, unmistakably, the reason people trust him. A person who visibly carries what happened to them is legible in a way a smooth person is not. Jake is enormously likable and slightly unreachable, and that is not a coincidence. There is a piece of the middle seasons that belongs here, and it is about what Finn does for Jake, because we have been fairly one-sided, and it is not the whole truth. Finn shows up, absolutely, every time, without hesitation. When Jake's family needs something, Finn is there. When Jake is in trouble, Finn goes, immediately, at any cost, without weighing it. When Jake's brother turns up with a decade of resentment, Finn is in the room. That is not nothing, and it is not the lesser contribution. It is a different one. Jake provides continuous low-grade steadiness. Finn provides absolute reliability at the moment of crisis. And those are genuinely different services, and most people are only capable of one. There are friends who are wonderful in an emergency and cannot be relied upon for a Tuesday. There are friends who are a comfort every week and are somehow not there when the thing actually happens. Finn and Jake between them cover both, and neither of them could do the other's job, which is what a good pairing actually is, and it is why the show works, and it is why almost every enduring friendship in real life is between people who do not resemble each other. Separately, each of them is badly exposed. Jake alone would drift pleasantly and be no use to anybody in a crisis. Finn alone would burn through his 20s at high intensity with nobody to lower the temperature. Together, they have full coverage, and neither of them ever knew that was the arrangement, because you do not audit the person who is filling in what you lack. You just notice, vaguely, that things go better when they are around. There is a stretch of the show where Jake has his own crisis, and it is worth a section, because it is the only time the story is about him. Jake goes into himself. Literally, there is an episode where he travels inside his own body and encounters the things living in it. There is another where he confronts what he actually is, and where he came from, and the strangeness of his origin. And the striking thing is how little sticks. He comes out the other side, essentially unchanged, having had experiences that would rearrange most people permanently. He finds it interesting rather than threatening. Then he has a snack. There is also a stretch where something enormous is offered to him, a kind of transcendence, a way out of ordinary existence. And what is interesting is not that he declines it It is that he does not appear to feel the pull of it at all. You have to have wanted more to want out. And this is the section where Finn is the one who is around, and it is worth noticing that he is not very good at it. Finn's method for a friend in difficulty is Finn's method for everything. Identify the problem, locate it, address it, and Jake's difficulties are not shaped like that. There is nothing to go at. There is a dog having an unusual week, and no external cause to defeat. So Finn does what he can, which is to be present and slightly agitated, and it is fine, and it is not the thing Jake does for him. That asymmetry is real, and the show does not fix it. The support in this friendship runs mostly in one direction for 10 years, not because Finn is a bad friend. He would do anything, and does, repeatedly, but because he does not have the equipment for that particular job, and Jake does, and neither of them ever discusses it. Most long friendships have an imbalance like that. It is rarely about love, and it is almost always about equipment. There is a piece of Jake's family that comes back in the late seasons, and it should not be skipped, because it closes something. Jermaine returns, the brother who stayed, the one who has spent his adult life at the family home holding the responsibilities their father left behind, while Jake went off and had a life in a tree with a boy. And when they are finally in a room together, what comes out is resentment, and it is aimed at Jake. Jake does not handle it well. That is worth saying. He does not have a good answer, because he has not thought about it, because thinking about it is not something he does. He is confronted with a version of his own life he has never examined, the version in which his lightness was subsidized, and he does not have the equipment to examine it now. What he does have is the willingness to show up, which he does, and it helps, in the partial and unsatisfying way these things help. And what makes the Jermaine material land is what it says about the friendship by contrast. Jake got a brother who was assigned to him by biology, and a brother he was given by a decision in a wood, and it is the second one who got everything. That is uncomfortable and true. The relationship Jake actually invested in for 10 years is not the one he was born into. He is a distant brother to Jermaine, and an extraordinary one to Finn, and there is no version of him that could have been both, because being extraordinary to somebody takes all of it. You have a limited amount of that. Everybody does. And where it goes is decided early, and mostly not on purpose. There is something else the show does with time that I want to name before we go on, because it explains why the friendship feels the way it does in memory. Time in Adventure Time is not tracked. Characters age unevenly. Some things clearly took years and are never dated. There is no calendar. You cannot say how long any of this lasted. That is normally a weakness in a long-running show. Here it produces something specific, which is that you cannot audit anybody's progress. You cannot say Finn spent 2 years being difficult and 18 months recovering. You only get before and after, at intervals, with the middle removed. And that is the actual experience of watching somebody change. You do not see the process. You see them at Christmas, and again the next Christmas, and something is different, and neither of you could say when it happened. Which means the show never has the episode where Finn learns what Jake knows. There is no scene where it lands, no music cue, no moment of understanding. That absence is conspicuous in a show that gives Finn a great many lessons explicitly, in episodes built for the purpose. It was declined. And the reason it would not work is that the lesson episode would have to end with Finn understanding, and understanding is precisely what cannot happen on a schedule. People do not learn things that way. People learn things over decades, unevenly, mostly without noticing, and the moment of insight when it comes is almost never the cause of the change. It is a report issued long after. The show gave up the satisfying scene in order to be accurate about that. It is a rare trade, and almost nobody makes it. Now the separations, and there are more of them than you remember. This is the part of the story that gets flattened in memory. If you asked most people, they would say Finn and Jake are together for the whole show. In fact, the later seasons pull them apart repeatedly, and each separation is doing something different. The first is Jake's family. Jake has a partner and 5 children, and a life that is not in the treehouse, and the show quietly increases the amount of time he spends elsewhere. It is not dramatic. He is simply less available than he was, in the way that happens to everybody's friends in their late 20s, and Finn adjusts without comment. The second is competence. As Finn gets older, he starts doing things alone, not because of a rift, because a 17-year-old does not need somebody to come with him the way a 12-year-old does. The show handles this by simply having Jake not be in some episodes, and it is so undramatic that it barely registers. That is one of the more honest things in the series. The friendships of your 20s do not end. They thin by degrees, through nobody's fault, because both people are becoming more capable of being alone. The third is the big one, and it is the islands. Finn learns there are other humans. Across an ocean, on islands, a whole population of them, and he has spent his entire life believing he was the last. So he goes, and this is the closest the show ever comes to a genuine crossroads for the friendship, because this is not an adventure. This is Finn leaving. He is going to find where he came from. There is a real possibility that he stays, and Jake has no stake in it at all. Jake knows exactly where he came from, has a family here, has a life here, has no reason to cross an ocean. And Jake goes anyway. That is the single largest thing Jake does in the entire series, and it is done without any discussion. There is no scene in which he weighs it. There is no speech about loyalty. Finn is going, so Jake is going, and the matter does not appear to have required any thought. Now look at what happens out there, because it is the closest the show comes to depicting the ordinary texture of a long trip with somebody. It is boring. Sometimes they get on each other's nerves. There is a stretch where they are stuck in a confined space for a long period, and it is not romanticized. Jake is frightened at points. Finn is single-minded to the point of being poor company. And at the end of it, Finn finds the humans, and finds his mother, and discovers what happened, and it is not what he wanted, and he chooses to come home. The choice is the point. He gets the thing he has wanted since he was old enough to want anything, and he looks at it, and he goes back to the tree with the dog. Not because the humans were bad, because the thing he was actually looking for was not there, and by that point he had it, and had had it for years, and it was standing next to him on a beach. Before that, there is a storyline that puts the friendship under a pressure nothing else does, and it is about there being 2 of him. Late in the series, Finn acquires a duplicate, not a clone in the ordinary sense. Something grew out of a magical injury, took his shape, had his memories up to the point of separation, and then walked around being a person. His name is Fern, and Fern is not Finn, and also is not Finn, and the show handles it with far more seriousness than the premise deserves. Because here is what Fern is, a version of Finn that has been given a separate, continuous existence. Everything Finn was up to that moment, Fern also was. And from that moment they diverge, and after a while they are unmistakably different people, and neither of them is the fake one. Now, what does that do to the friendship? It does something very specific, and it is one of the sadder things in the late seasons. Because Fern has all of Finn's memories, which means Fern remembers Jake. Fern remembers the treehouse and the mornings, and every afternoon on the hill. From the inside, Fern has a decade of friendship with Jake, and Jake does not have it with him. That is an unbearable position, and the show puts a character in it and does not flinch. Somebody who remembers the whole of a relationship accurately and is not the person the other party was in it with. What it says about the friendship is that it is not made of memories. If it were, Fern would have it. It is made of the continuous thing the going out and coming back, the accumulated actual afternoons, and you cannot inherit that. There is a version of this you already know. You have a friend from a long time ago. You both remember it, and if you met now, you would not be able to reassemble it out of the memories, because the memories were never the thing. And there is a second use for Fern, which is to answer a question about Finn that has been running the whole series. Fern is what Finn is like without Jake. That is not stated, and I think it is deliberate. Fern has Finn's operating system, Finn's wound, Finn's need to be worth keeping, and no steadying presence at all. Nobody making him lunch. Nobody breaking the escalation with a joke about a sandwich. And Fern does not do well. That is not a moral failing on Fern's part, and the show is careful about that. It is a demonstration. The same person, minus the one variable, and the outcome is significantly worse. Which is the most direct statement the series makes about what Jake was actually providing. And it is delivered as a horror plot about a grass duplicate. There is one more separation before that one, and it is the smallest and possibly the saddest, which is that they stop sharing a bedroom. That sounds trivial. It is in the show and it is easy to miss. In the early seasons, they sleep in the same room. 2 beds, 1 space, the way children do. It is never remarked on because it does not need remarking on. And at some point they do not. Nobody announces it. There is no episode about it. Finn gets older and the arrangement changes, and the show simply draws it differently afterward. And if you are not looking for it, you will never notice. That is exactly how it goes. There is a last night that 2 children share a room, and nobody knows it is the last one. There is a last time you are carried, a last time somebody reads to you, a last time a friendship has the shape it currently has. None of them are marked. You find out years later, by inference, that a category of things stopped happening at some point you cannot identify. The show is full of these, and it never points at any of them. There is a last time Jake carries Finn somewhere. There is a last morning in the treehouse before it is gone. There is a last ordinary afternoon on a hill. And because the show does not mark them, you experience them the way you experience your own, which is not at all, and then all at once, much later, on a rewatch, at 1 in the morning. There is one more feature of the later seasons that is worth naming, because it changes the texture, and most people feel it without identifying it. Finn starts having other people. He builds relationships across U that are genuinely his, with Bonnable, with Marceline, with the younger characters he ends up mentoring, with Simon in the last stretch. He has a full social life that is not rooted through Jake. That is healthy, and it is normal, and it is also a change, and the show does not pretend it is not. Because in the early seasons there is one relationship and everything else is an encounter. By the end there is a network, and Jake is one node in it, and a node in a network occupies a different amount of somebody's life than a soul relationship does. Nobody did anything wrong, nothing was lost, and there is still less of it than there was, and both of them can presumably feel it, and neither of them mentions it. That is the thing about growing up that nobody warns you about. The friendship that was your entire world at 12 does not end. It becomes one of several, and the demotion is invisible and permanent, and not anybody's fault. The show depicts that honestly across 10 years, and never once has a character remark on it, which is exactly how it goes. Now the strangest separation, and the one that does something to the friendship that nothing else does. There is a stretch in the late seasons where the whole of U is transformed. Everybody in it is changed into an extreme version of some quality, and they lose themselves in it, and the world becomes something else entirely. Jake is changed, Finn is changed, and what is horrible about it, in a show that is not usually horrible, is that they are both still there, and neither of them is reachable. That is a different thing from being apart. Apart is manageable. Apart has a distance you can cross. This is the other one. The person is in front of you and is not available. Their face is right there, and whatever made them them has been replaced by something with the same shape. The show has done this before, with a crown over 1,000 years, to a man who ended up not knowing his own name. It knows exactly what this scenario does to an audience, and it does it deliberately to the central pair. And what gets them back, at the end of it, is not a weapon. It is being reminded of each other. That is the mechanism the show keeps returning to, and it is worth naming as clearly as possible, because it will come up once more at the very end. In Adventure Time, the thing that reverses dissolution is not force. It is somebody who knew you before, insisting. There is a stretch worth pausing on that the show delivers as comedy and which is doing something else underneath, which is what happens when they disagree. They argue rarely, and the arguments have a specific shape. Finn's arguments are moral. He thinks something is wrong, and he says so, and he wants it corrected. He is capable of real anger about it, and he does not manage it well. Jake does not argue back. That is the pattern. He deflects, he agrees to something, he changes the subject, or he simply absorbs it, and it is over in about 8 seconds. There is no escalation available, because one party will not participate. Now that is either extremely healthy or a form of avoidance, and I genuinely think it is both, at different times, and the show never tells you which is which in any given case. Because it is the same instrument, the jokes that regulate Finn also protect Jake. When Jake does not want to discuss a thing, the thing gets a joke, and the joke closes the door, and it closes it so pleasantly that nobody notices a door was closed. Watch him around his children. Watch him when the subject of his father comes up. Watch him in the 2 or 3 moments across 10 seasons where somebody asks him something real about himself. There is always a joke, and it is always good, and the subject always changes. So the same technique that makes him the best friend in the show also makes him slightly unreachable, and his family notice, and Finn does not. That is what makes him a character rather than a philosophy. He is not enlightened, he is defended. And it means there is a category of conversation these two never have. In 10 years, Finn never asks Jake how he is doing in a way that gets a real answer, and Jake never volunteers one, and the friendship is enormous and warm and has a room in it that neither of them enters. Most long friendships have that room. Almost nobody talks about it. The show put one in the middle of its central relationship and left it closed for a decade, and it is one of the truest things in it. Then the treehouse ends. I want to handle this carefully because I do not want to state a mechanism I am not certain of. What is unambiguous is that the tree does not survive the series. The house they lived in for the entire run, the one with the salvage furniture and the games console and the couch, is destroyed before the end, and they do not rebuild it. That is worth sitting with. The setting of nearly every memory you have of this show simply stops existing partway through the final stretch, and the characters carry on, and there is no episode about grieving the house. Which is accurate. Nobody has that episode. The place where the thing happened stops being available. It gets sold or demolished or somebody else moves in, and you do not have a ceremony about it. You just notice one day that there is nowhere to go back to. Everything after that point happens somewhere else. That is the last quiet thing the show does before the ending, and almost nobody registers it as a loss because there is too much else going on. There is a small stretch here that people skip, and it is one of the more painful things in the late seasons, which is what happens to their competence. Late in the show, Finn is very good. He is a genuinely capable young man with years of experience, a functioning moral framework, and a considerable amount of skill. And Jake is exactly as capable as he was in Season 1. That is not a decline. Jake has not got worse. He simply has not moved, and Finn has. and there is a point somewhere in the last 2 seasons where they cross. The show never announces it. There is no scene where Finn realizes he is better than Jake at this now. There is no conversation about it. What there is instead is a gradual change in who is deciding things. It happens over a couple of seasons, and it is so undramatic that you barely register it, and by the end Finn is leading and Jake is coming along, which is the inverse of the arrangement at the start, when Jake was substantially more powerful and let Finn be in charge anyway. So the deference that was a kindness at 12 becomes accurate at 17. The pretense stops being a pretense. Jake never had to hand anything over, because he had been behaving as though he already had, for years. That is the smoothest possible version of a transition that in most relationships is agonizing. The moment when the younger one becomes the more capable one is a wound in an enormous number of families and friendships, and it is a wound because somebody has to give something up. Jake had nothing to give up. He had never claimed it in the first place, which is either the luckiest accident in the show or the most quietly generous piece of foresight in it, and I do not think Jake was capable of foresight, so it is probably the first. There is a question that the late seasons raise and never answer, and it belongs here because it is the last uncertainty before the ending. What would have happened if Finn had stayed on the islands? He had the option. There were humans there. There was a whole population of his own kind, which is the thing he had wanted since he was old enough to want anything, and he could have had it. And the show puts Jake right there while the decision is being made and gives him nothing to do. Jake cannot argue for himself. That is the situation. He cannot say, choose me over an entire species, choose a tree over a home, choose the arrangement we have over the thing you have been looking for your whole life. He could have. People do. There is an entirely ordinary version of this scene where the friend makes a case, and it is not even a bad thing to do. He does not. He waits. That is the largest silence in the whole 10 years, and it is completely in character, and it is also, if you think about what is at stake for him, an extraordinary act of restraint, because he has as much to lose as anybody in the story. If Finn stays, Jake goes home to a tree by himself, and he says nothing and lets it be Finn's, and Finn comes back. The show never has either of them acknowledge that this happened. There is no conversation afterward about the choice. They just get on the boat and go home, and the next episode is about something else. Now the end of the world. The final threat in Adventure Time is not a villain in the usual sense. It has no plan. It does not want anything. It is not evil, and it is not good, and it does not appear to be aware of anyone. It is a force whose entire nature is that things come apart around it. Coherence fails. Things lose their shape. At 9, that is a big scary monster at the end, which is what a story is supposed to have. Later, you recognize it, because it is not an invention. It is a name for something you have watched happen. Things do come apart. Friendships do. Families do. Minds do. And the show has already shown you one doing it slowly across 10 seasons. The final threat of Adventure Time is entropy with a face on it. And what defeats it is worth being precise about, because it is the payoff of everything we have described tonight. It is not a sword. Finn does not beat it. Nobody is a chosen one. Power does not enter into it. They hold on to each other and they sing. That sounds unbearable in a sentence, and works completely in the episode, and the reason it works is that the show has spent a decade earning it. It has established, over 280 episodes, that the only thing which has ever functioned against dissolution in this world is people staying attached to each other and doing something together with their voices. That is not a metaphor invented for the finale. That is the finding of the entire series, produced in advance and cached at the end. And notice who is present. Not the powerful, not the ancient. Everybody, all at once, including candy people with brooms, including characters who have been jokes for 10 seasons, including the ones with no abilities at all. Marceline's 1,000 years are worth exactly one voice, the same as a Candy Citizen's 40. There is a piece of the finale worth slowing down on, because it is where the friendship stops being background and becomes the mechanism. When the thing that makes coherence fail arrives, everybody in OO is in trouble in the same way. It is not a fight anybody can win. There is no weakness to exploit. And what happens is that people hold on to each other. Now, look at who is holding on to whom, because the show is specific about it, and most people do not clock the details. It is not organized. Nobody assigns positions. People grab the person nearest to them, which means the pairs and groups that form in that moment are a map of who was actually standing where, who had gravitated toward whom over 10 years without anybody planning it. And the song they sing is not a battle hymn, it is the theme song, the thing you have heard at the start of every episode since you were 9, sung by the characters at the end of the world. Come along with me. That is the weapon, an invitation to go out with somebody, with no destination specified, deployed against entropy. I want to be careful here, because it sounds absurd stated plainly, and it works completely in the episode. The reason it works is that the show has spent a decade establishing that this is the only thing that has ever functioned in this world. Every time somebody was lost, to a crown, to a transformation, to grief, to a bad stretch, what brought them back was somebody who knew them, insisting. So when the largest possible version of being lost arrives, the answer is the same answer, scaled up. And Finn and Jake are in the middle of it, doing what they have done for 10 years, which is being next to each other while something happens. That is the last time you see them together in the original run, not on a quest, not in a duel, holding on, in a crowd, singing badly. There is an honest caveat that has to go in here, because a 2.5-hour argument that never doubts itself is not an argument, it is a sales pitch. Some of what has been said tonight is more than the show can carry. Adventure Time was made over 8 years by a rotating crew to a broadcast schedule. Different writers wanted different things from Jake. He is not a single coherent construction executed to a plan. Some of his consistency is the consistency of a comedy character being written the way comedy characters get written, which is, keep doing the thing that works. The line about being bad at something was almost certainly not conceived as a load-bearing philosophical statement. It was a good joke that landed. And there is a whole industry of finding meaning in this show. And some of that meaning was put there, and some has been added by 15 years of very devoted people wanting it to be there. So hold the reading loosely. It is a reading. It is not a decoding. But here is why I think most of it survives the doubt. The pattern is too long. A writer's room can produce an accidental resonance in an episode. It is much harder to accidentally produce 10 years, in which one character consistently initiates the plotless episodes, and the other one consistently cannot sit still. That is not a moment. That is a structure. And structures that hold for 280 episodes are usually load-bearing whether or not anybody articulated them in a meeting. The show may not have known what it was doing. It did it anyway. That happens far more often than people admit. There is a second caveat, and it is about the two of them rather than about the show. It would be easy, after 2 hours of this, to come away with a verdict that Jake was right and Finn was wrong, that one way of living is lighter and you have the heavier one. That is not what the show says, and it is worth being clear about it before we get to the ending. Nobody makes a show about Jake. There is no story in a person who is fine. Story requires somebody who wants something, and wanting is the machinery, and the machinery is what Finn has. So the machinery is not a defect. It is the reason there is a life with events in it. Every good thing Finn made was made by the part of him that could not leave it alone, and if that part was switched off, he would be more comfortable and considerably less interesting, including to himself. And Jake, honestly assessed, never gets better. He is the same at the end as at the beginning. His ease costs him growth, because growth is powered by the exact discomfort he does not experience. He is a mediocre father, a distant brother, and sometimes a bad influence, and the show lets all of that stand. The ledger, kept honestly, looks like this. Jake is happier, more restful to be around, better at friendship, unbothered by failure, and permanently stuck. Finn is anxious, driven, difficult for a stretch, incapable of a Sunday, and is by the end a substantially better person than he was at the start, in ways that are visible and earned. Neither column is obviously the one to want. The show puts both on screen for a decade and lets you keep score yourself, and most viewers keep it differently at 12, at 25, and at 40. There is one more piece before the montage, and it is about who else was in the room for 10 years, because the friendship was never actually a closed system. BMO. We have mentioned BMO, and we owe more than that, because the treehouse was a household of 3, and the third one has a completely different relationship to both of them than they have to each other. BMO is not a friend in the way Jake is a friend to Finn. BMO is the one who is there when they get back, the keeper of the place, the thing that makes the treehouse a home rather than a base of operations. And there is a division of labor that nobody ever agreed to. Jake makes the food and BMO keeps the house, and Finn does none of it. And this arrangement runs for a decade without a single conversation about it. That is also true of every shared house that has ever worked. The negotiation does not happen. Somebody starts doing a thing, and then that is who does that thing, permanently, and it holds until somebody leaves. And BMO's role in this story is to be the reason it survives, because 1,000 years later, when everything is over, BMO is the one telling it. The friendship we have spent tonight describing exists in the far future of that world, because a small robot who was in the house for all of it can still describe what those two were like. The witness is not one of the participants. It never is. The people who can tell you what your parents were like when they were young are never your parents. And the thing BMO chooses to tell, out of the wars, the kingdoms, the cosmic entities, all of it available as material, is what those two were like together. That is the show voting, one last time, on what any of it was about. Then the show ends and does the last thing, which is to skip forward and show you what became of everybody. It is a montage. It is fast. It gives you futures, who ended up where, who stayed together, who got old. At the time, that read to a lot of people as cold. The show spent 10 years making you care about these characters, and then pulled the camera back so far that they became history. It reads completely differently now. Because the montage is not saying they stopped mattering. It is saying they got the rest of it. They had the years. The things you were worried about on their behalf worked out, mostly, in the unremarkable way things work out, off-screen, without a plot attached. That is the most reassuring thing a story can do, and almost none of them do it, because there is no drama in it. Most endings resolve the crisis and stop, leaving the characters permanently at the moment of maximum tension, forever 22, forever in the hardest week of their lives. Adventure Time let them get old. It let them become boring. It let them have decades that were not worth dramatizing, which is the actual reward for surviving the difficult part. And it presented that as the happy ending, because it is one. There is a thing about the show itself that belongs here, because it happened in the world rather than in the story, and it is the strangest piece of evidence available. Adventure Time aged in real time. It ran for 8 years. The boy who voiced Finn was a child when it started, and an adult when it ended, and you can hear it happen. The show did not hide it. His voice changes across the seasons because a real person was growing up while it was being recorded. Jake's voice does not change. The actor was already an adult. So the asymmetry we have been describing all night, one of them transforming, one of them constant, is not only a writing choice, it is physically present in the recordings. You can hear a child becoming a man next to a man who is already a man, over 8 years, in the audio. And there is a coda to that which arrived recently, and which is almost too on the nose. The franchise came back with a prequel, set in the early days, about the two of them when Finn was young, and they could not use the same actor. He is too old now to play a 12-year-old. Somebody else has the part. Think about what that means for a story about a friendship. The character is fixed. Finn at 12 is permanently 12, available forever, watchable at any time, unchanged. He will be 12 in 100 years, and the person who was him has aged out. That is not a metaphor anybody constructed. That is just what happened in the world to a production, because time is real, and it applies to everybody, including the people who make cartoons about it, which puts you in the same position as the show. You have watched the same 11 minutes at 9 and at 29, and the 11 minutes have not moved. The friendship in them is fixed, permanent, available. You are the part that is running out, and that is where the whole value of it comes from. And then it goes further out, 1,000 years further. Everything you have watched is gone. Ooh has moved on. There are two young characters you have never met, who know none of it, who find an old object and are curious about it, and go and ask somebody. And the somebody is Bimo, the little one who stayed in the house, the one who waited while they went out. 1,000 years later, Bimo is the one who remembers and tells it, and the whole enormous saga has become a story told to children who were not there. That is where the show chooses to end, not with the heroes, with the witness. And the thing about that ending, which took me years to see, is what it says about the friendship specifically. Because what Bimo is telling them is not a lore summary. Bimo is telling them about two people who lived in this tree and went out in the mornings. The story that survives 1,000 years is not the quests, it is the arrangement. Before we go there, we should look at how the rest of Ooh does friendship, because the show gives you comparisons and they make the central pair legible. There is Marceline and Bonibel, which is the longest relationship in the series, and by a wide margin the most difficult. They have a history, most of it before the show starts, and it includes things neither of them has processed. There was closeness and a breach and a long stretch of coldness, and the show doles this out in fragments across seasons and never gives you the full account. And the mechanism of the difficulty is worth naming. They are both people who have adapted to enormous amounts of time by not opening. Marceline stopped at an age and stayed there. Bonibel attached to a kingdom rather than to people. Both are survival strategies, and both are, precisely, strategies for not being reached. So you have two people who have each spent centuries building a way of not being reached, trying to reach each other. Now put that next to Finn and Jake, and notice what is absent. There is no breach. In 10 seasons, there is no stretch where Finn and Jake are not speaking. There is no accumulated grievance, no cold period, no thing that happened that neither of them will raise. That is remarkable, and it is not because they are nicer than Marceline and Bonibel. It is because neither of them keeps a file. Jake does not accumulate. We have established that. And Finn, for all his machinery, does not accumulate against Jake specifically. Whatever goes in his file, Jake does not. And there is Simon and Marceline, which is the other comparison and the darker one. He looked after her for a few years when she was small, and then something took him, and she has carried it for 1,000 years. What she has is a relationship that continues entirely on one side. She does the remembering for both of them. The reason that belongs here is that it is the version of Finn and Jake that runs after one of them is gone. And the show, having built that parallel across 10 seasons, then does the thing at the end that we are about to get to, which is to refuse to leave Finn in Marceline's position permanently. There is one more comparison, and it is the one nobody makes, which is Finn's other friendships. He has many. He is popular. He is known throughout the land. He has done things for a great many people, and by any social measure, he is the more successful of the two. And in a room full of people, Finn works. He is attentive, responsive, checks on people, is aware of who needs something. He is doing the job even at a party. Jake in a crowd is having a nice time. He talks to whoever is nearest. He is not managing the room. He is enjoying himself at a party in the manner of somebody who came to a party. The counterintuitive thing is who people are actually pleased to see. Because Finn's attention, however genuine, arrives with a slight edge of duty in it. You can feel it. Somebody is checking whether you are all right, and it is lovely, and it is also faintly an assessment. Being in his care is not quite the same as being in his company. Jake's attention arrives with nothing attached. If he is talking to you, it is because he wants to be talking to you. There is no other reason available, because he does not have other reasons. That is what people cannot articulate about certain friends. Why is it restful to see this person? It is restful because they are not doing anything to you. Their presence in the conversation is not instrumental to any project, including a kind one. And that is why, out of everybody in Oo, out of a princess he was in love with for years, out of an ancient vampire, out of an entire kingdom of people who owe him, the one Finn actually lives with is the dog who wants nothing from him. There is a stretch we have not examined, and it is the last piece of evidence, which is what the two of them are like when the other one is not there. The show gives you both, occasionally, and the results are not symmetrical. Jake alone does not fall apart, and does not become a different person. He does slightly smaller versions of the same things. He eats, he putters, he talks to himself in a way that is companionable rather than lonely. That is the test of whether somebody's ease is real or is being supplied by company, and Jake passes it. His temperature does not depend on Finn being in the room. Finn alone is worse. He escalates. Without somebody to regulate him, he goes further into whatever he is going into, and the episodes where he is by himself for a stretch tend to be the ones where he does something he regrets. That is not a criticism of Finn. Most people are like that. Most people's stability is at least partly a function of who is around, and the fact that this is invisible until the person is not around is one of the harder things about losing anybody. And it makes the 29-year-old more remarkable, not less. Because by then, the regulation is coming from inside, and it did not used to. Now the part after the end, which is the part almost nobody has processed, because it arrived years later, in pieces, and by then, most people had stopped watching. The franchise came back. Specials, and then a series, and the thing about them is who they were made for. They are not for children. They are for the people who were children when the show started and are not anymore, and they know it, and they are built accordingly. And in one of them, Finn is 29. He has a life. It is a decent life. He is not in crisis. He has a partner and a home and things he does, and he is functional and largely content in the way a person of 29 is content, which is to say mostly with a low background hum. And Jake is not there. The show does not make an event of it. There is no episode about the loss. It is simply the condition of the world now, established the way you establish weather, and everything Finn does happens inside it. That is a remarkable thing for a franchise to do to its audience, and it is done with almost no ceremony. The unit that was in the title sequence for a decade is one person now, and the show declines to dramatize it, and the declining is what makes it land. Because that is how it actually goes. There is not a scene, there is a period afterward in which the person is simply not there, and the not being there is not an event. It is a permanent alteration in the temperature of every room, and it does not get a soundtrack. Look at Finn at 29. He is doing well. He is kinder than he was. He is capable of sitting with people, which he could not do at 15. When somebody near him needs steadiness, Finn is the one who is steady, and he does it without flailing and without trying to fix it. If you have been following tonight, you will notice that he is doing, at 29, precisely what Jake did for him. He got there, not by being taught, by running his own program long enough that pieces of it wore down, and by having been in the presence of the other thing for so long that when he arrived at the place, he recognized the furniture. That is the answer to the question I left open earlier. Nothing transmitted as a lesson, something transmitted anyway, at a much slower rate, by simple proximity, the way a cold room gets warm. You can borrow somebody's steadiness for years, and then discover, after they are gone, that a portion of it stayed, not the whole of it, enough to notice. There is something about the shape of Finn's life at 29 that is worth looking at directly, because it is the show's most honest statement about what happens after. He is not in mourning. That is the first thing. The special does not depict a man defined by loss. He has a life that is going along with things in it, and the absence is not the subject of any scene. And underneath that, there is a low restlessness, a sense that this might not be what it was for, that the years of being the hero were leading somewhere, and this is not obviously it. He is fine and he is not settled, which is precisely the condition of a great many people at 29 and 35 and 42. You do the thing that was supposed to be the point. You get through the part that was difficult, and then there is a Tuesday, and there is nothing structurally wrong with the Tuesday, and something that has been running underneath since childhood is still running, and it is quieter now, but it is not gone. Jake would have known what to say. That is the thought that arrives, and it is not really true. Jake would not have known what to say. Jake would have said something stupid about a sandwich, and it would have helped, and neither of them would have known why. But the sandwich is not available anymore. That is what it means for somebody to be gone. Not that you have lost their advice. Their advice was mostly nonsense. You have lost the thing that came with the nonsense. And there is one more observation about the 29-year-old, and it is the most hopeful thing in this whole episode. He is steadier at 29, alone, than he was at 17 with Jake beside him, which means he did not simply borrow the regulation. Some of it got installed, not the whole of it. He is not Jake and never will be, but a portion of it stayed, permanently, in a person who could not have told you it was happening while it happened. You can be next to somebody's steadiness for years and then discover, after they are gone, that some of it is now yours. That is the answer to the obvious objection, which is that if the lesson could not be taught, then the decade was wasted. It was not wasted. Nothing transmitted as a lesson. Something transmitted anyway, at a much slower rate, by simple proximity, the way a cold room gets warm. And then there is the last thing, which is the reason this episode can end where it ends. The franchise did one more special, and it is about Finn dying. Not tragically. He is old. He has had the whole life, the one the montage promised. All of it, decades of it. And at the far end of it, he arrives somewhere else. And he goes looking for Jake. That is the entire premise. An old man in the afterlife, looking for his dog. I want to be careful about how much I describe, because it is worth watching, and because the value of it is not in the plot. What matters for tonight is the structure of it, which is this. The very last thing this franchise chose to make, after everything, after 10 seasons and a spin-off, and a decade of other stories, was a story about these two finding each other again. Not saving the world, not a final quest, just the two of them, together, at the end, after a long time apart. It is called Together Again. That is the title. They did not hide what it was. Before that, it is worth saying plainly how the show handles Jake's ending, because it is a model of restraint, and because it matters for how this lands. There is no death scene. There is no episode where Jake dies. There is no farewell, no last words, no bedside. The original series ends with everybody alive and gives you futures in a montage, and Jake's future is a good one. And then, years later, the world simply has no Jake in it, and the show does not explain and does not need to. That is a choice, and it is the kind one, because a death scene would have made the whole thing about the ending, and it is not about the ending. It is about the 10 years, and it is also accurate. In most people's experience, the ending is not the part they carry. The part they carry is the ordinary years, and the ending is a fact they know, and the two are stored in completely different places. So the show gives you the years in enormous detail, hundreds of hours of them, and gives you the ending as a piece of information, in passing, and lets you do what everybody does with the two, which is to keep the first one and file the second. Which is why, when the reunion finally comes, it does not feel like a resurrection or a reversal. It feels like the natural continuation of an arrangement that was interrupted. And it is worth asking why that was the note they chose, out of everything available, because they could have ended anywhere. There was a finale already. There was a 1,000-year epilogue already. The story was complete by any reasonable measure. They went back for this one because this was the thing the show was actually about, and everybody involved appears to have known it, and the 10 seasons of quests were the delivery mechanism. There is one more thing to sit with before the summing up, and it is the question this whole episode has been circling. Did Jake know? Did he know what he was doing? Did he understand that the plotless afternoons were a curriculum, that the jokes were interventions, that being reliably all right next to somebody was the single most valuable thing he had to offer? I do not think he did. I think that is the point, and I think it is why it worked. Because if Jake had known, the afternoons would have been lessons, and Finn would have felt them as lessons. People always do, and it would have failed immediately and unpleasantly, the way every deliberate attempt to improve somebody fails. Jake wanted lunch. He wanted to have it with Finn. That is the whole of the intention as far as the show ever shows us, and it is the only intention that could have produced the result. Which means the most important thing anybody did for anybody in this series was done accidentally, by somebody who was mostly thinking about a sandwich. That is not a diminishment. That is close to the entire finding. The people who have done the most for you were, in the majority of cases, not trying. They were being themselves in your vicinity, on a regular basis, for a long time. Nobody set out to shape you. Somebody just kept turning up, and turning up turned out to be the mechanism. And the corollary, which is uncomfortable, is that you cannot do it on purpose either. You cannot decide to be somebody's Jake. The moment it becomes a project, it stops working. All you can do is be reasonably all right, regularly, around people you like, and accept that you will never find out what it did. Jake never found out. That is the honest ending of his part of the story. He did not live to see Finn at 29 being steady in a room, doing the thing he did, without knowing where it came from. There is nobody to tell. There is no report. That is the arrangement. Let us draw it together now, because it has been a long time and it is late. Before the summary, there is one last observation, and it is the one I keep returning to. They are never bored of each other. 10 years, the same house, the same person, the same walk to the same places. 2 characters together in nearly every scene of nearly 300 episodes. And there is not a single moment anywhere in the series, where either of them appears tired of the other one. That is not realistic. That is a choice. Real people in close quarters for a decade get tired of each other periodically, and good writing usually includes that. And this show has plenty of conflict between them, and never that particular conflict. I think it is deliberate, and I think it is the show's one piece of open wish fulfillment, because everything else in Adventure Time is unsparing. The world ended and stayed ended. Parents fail and are not redeemed. Minds are lost and mostly stay lost. Nothing is repaired. And in the middle of all that, there is exactly one thing given without qualification, which is that these two like each other completely, and it does not wear out. That is what the show chose to hand you, out of everything it could have offered. Not a happy ending, not a repaired world, just the demonstration that two people can be in each other's company for a decade, and it can stay good the whole way through. Everything else in the show is a description of how things go. That one is a gift. Here is the whole thing, start to finish. A dog was born out of his father's head into a family with a secret in it, and grew up light because somebody else was carrying the weight. A baby was left in a wood by somebody who did not stay, and was found by strangers who did. They were raised as brothers on a fiction, by a hard man who loved them, in a house that no longer exists. They moved into a tree furnished with the belongings of a dead civilization, and made it the warmest room on television. They went out in the mornings and came back in the evenings, several hundred times, and most of what happened in between was not important, and the going out and coming back was the entire substance of both their lives. One of them was trying to prove he was worth keeping. The other one had never encountered the question and could not explain the absence of it, and spent 10 years arranging ordinary afternoons in the hope that some of it would get across. They failed each other in ordinary ways. One was a mediocre father while being an extraordinary friend, and could not be both, because the same quality produced both. The other one was difficult for a stretch, and self-involved, and applied his one tool to people it could not help. They were separated by families and by competence, and by an ocean and by a transformation that took them both. They were reunited every time, by nothing more sophisticated than one of them insisting. They faced the thing that makes coherence fail, and they beat it by holding on. They got old. One of them ended first. The other one carried a version of him forward for decades without ever quite knowing where it came from. And then, at the very end, they found each other. Which is where we can stop, because there is nothing after it. That is the story. That is all of it. And it is worth noticing what is not in that summary. There is no quest in it. There is no artifact, no prophecy, no destined confrontation. I have just described the entire arc of the central relationship of a fantasy adventure series, and none of the fantasy was necessary. That is because it was never a fantasy story with a friendship in it. It was a friendship with a fantasy story around it, and the fantasy was there because you will watch a magical sword fight at 9, and you will not watch two people having lunch. So they put the lunch inside the sword fight for 10 years and waited. There is one more thing worth saying about the ending they chose, because it was not the obvious one and the choice is meaningful. The franchise could have stopped anywhere. There was a finale. There was a 1,000-year epilogue. There were specials and a spin-off, and by any reasonable measure, the story was complete several times over. And what they went back for, at the very end, after everything, was a reunion, not a final battle, not a mystery resolved, not a piece of lore anybody was asking about. Two friends finding each other again after a long time. That tells you what the people making it thought the show had been about, and they were in a position to know. 10 seasons of quests and kingdoms and cosmic entities, and the thing they went back to finish was the arrangement between a boy and a dog. And there is a small mercy in the way they did it. which is worth naming because this show is not usually merciful. Adventure Time is unsparing about nearly everything. The world ended. Parents fail and are not redeemed. Minds are lost and mostly stay lost. Almost nothing in Oo gets fixed. This one thing they fixed. That is not sentimentality. It is a decision about where to spend the only piece of grace the story had, and they spent it here, on the relationship that had been carrying the whole show from underneath since the first episode. It is very late now. Somewhere in Oo, it is the middle of an afternoon that nothing depends on. There is a hill, and the grass has grown over the wreckage of a world that ended 1,000 years ago, and it is very green. There is a boy on it who will not sit still for very much longer, and a dog beside him who is already lying down. There is food, the light is good, nothing is being accomplished, and nothing is required. Neither of them is thinking about any of this. Neither of them knows that this afternoon is the point, or that there are a finite number of them, or that 1,000 years from now, a small robot will be telling somebody about it. They are just out. They will go home in a bit. That is the whole story, and it always was. Sleep well.